Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 76th episode of Kouryer podcast. It's been a long time since I recorded and published another episode. It's been like 3 weeks or something because I've been busy a lot in my personal life. And we're back with a lot of more guests lined up. And today we're joined with Mr. Clive Almeida. He's a concept artist currently working at Yash Raj Films, a studio from Mumbai, India. Now, with that out of the way, could you please give us a little introduction on how you got into visual arts and design?
Thank you for having me on, by the way. So I got on to concept art. I just started my career in concept art back in 2019, which is fairly new. And just a year before that, I was in FCD in 2018. But there's this huge gap of when I actually wanted to start concept art, right? Because I came to know about it back in 2010 when I happened upon Feng Shu's videos, Chaos Control, all those YouTube videos that he had out. Since ever since then, I like kind of knew that I wanted to get in concept art because I was always interested into the art field, but I didn't know exactly how to go about it. So, but to get into FCD, I needed that money, right? So I came up with a backup plan and eventually got into graphic designing for 5 years after graduating. And I graduated in computer science because back then, like we didn't have very good internet, so we couldn't really research much on like how, what kind of graduation do I do, what kind of field do I go into to get into this kind of a industry. So eventually, after graduating, I got in as a graphic designer in a newspaper industry, and after a year of that, I went into hotel industry as a graphic designer. And then finally, after building up a bank for FZD, I eventually decided to go to Singapore and get it done in 2018. And then soon after that, like it took me a half a year after graduating to get into break into the industry with some freelance work, and then eventually I got into Yash Raj as well.
Awesome. FCD is in Singapore, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, I heard a lot of great things about that school. And a lot of like successful, like what was the word for it? Alumni, something like what is the name of the
Alumni,
lit?
yeah.
Yeah, alumni.
Alumni, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's something like that.
Alumni.
I forgot the name of the term, but
Correct.
it has a really successful roster of that. And yeah, how was the experience and studying there?
It was actually pretty grueling. I was prepared for it because they kind of tell you beforehand, before coming, while you're doing the interview process, that it's going to be extremely difficult. It's going to be many nights, sleepless nights, and all you're going to be doing is just art, like 24/7, every day. Even during your term breaks that you have in between, it's just draw, 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 and you draw all day and all night. And I mean, I prepared myself, but it was way worse than I thought it was going to be. But eventually, if you know what you're like doing, if you have your goals in mind and you are focused on what you're going to do, then I think it's much easier that way because it really takes a toll. I've seen like almost like a good percentage of every class that comes in, like you'll have people that break down and cry and stuff like that. It's very grueling. But after the entire thing, after we're done with it, you really come out with like some really good friends and make some really good contacts, and eventually you come out with a solid portfolio as well.
Speaking of people breaking down, how would you how would you how could you cope with that pressure? Like especially I mean it's also kind of a relatively new subject as well for me personally because but not just for me, for a lot of people, because when of course the bad virus, I'm just gonna call it that, hit the
Yeah,
world everywhere.
yeah,
A lot of people got it stuck inside, and long story short, a lot of mental pressure, was on people
correct.
everywhere.
Yeah.
And do you have any thoughts on that, on how to deal with the whole mental health situation of that stuff to maintain that momentum of drawing and keep pushing and going?
So there are a couple of things I would say to that is basically there's one where you got like burnout, when you mentally cannot come up with anything and then you're just struggling to draw. And then the other thing is basically just you don't know what to do exactly, whether it's the right fit for you, whether you can make it into the industry. When it comes to um, the burnout, basically what I've learned is what helps me is that you got to make some time for yourself. You got to put some breaks in, right? Like when in between projects, and kind of take some time to yourself. I really feel that whenever I would spend too many hours working for many days on a project, it would take me much longer to get back into it if I reach that burnout stage, because I would have days where it would go for a couple of weeks I couldn't come up with anything. And that you, to try and avoid that, I think the best thing that has helped me so far has been like trying to take every day, try to put some time for yourself, just like go read a book, go watch a movie, go spend time with the family. For me, the most important during those times, which like kind of puts both together, is for me it's always been family, friends, my partner as well. Like putting time for them, just clearing my head out, knowing the things why I'm doing these things and for whom I'm doing it for. Like it puts things back into perspective, and that along with um, things like reading books and watching movies and just going out, like it really helps cope up with mental pressure of it every day. And of course, like you gotta love what you're doing, otherwise it's like you're not going to survive in the industry. It takes a huge toll on you if you don't, if this is not what you really want to do.
Yeah, all right, makes sense. Fair enough. And well, another question I have is, were you originally studying art and design, or you were pursuing another career path? I mean, you already earlier mentioned that you studied computer science, comp sci for 5 years, if I'm not mistaken.
It was for 3 years, computer science, and actually I didn't do anything related to design before that or even after. It was the like the biggest issue we had over here, at least back in my hometown, was we didn't have internet. We didn't even have internet where you could open like Google Images properly. So it was only until I went to college, when I got into computer science, everyone was like, "Oh, you got to get into computers if you want to get into any kind of animation or gaming field." And I didn't know about concept art, right? So I, because of that peer pressure, kind of, I forced myself. Okay, let me at least do computer science. Is the most closest thing I can think of. And I don't know why I didn't even choose art field, because the the pressure you get from like just doing engineering or becoming a doctor over here is like, if you're doing anything other than that, people would like be like, why are you not doing engineering or something? So that's why I ended up choosing computer science. I got kind of pushed into it. Eventually I finally found out what concept art was, and then I put my mind to it. But I didn't know how to draw. I couldn't draw up until I went to FCD. I didn't even practice. I mean, I used to do a little bit of drawing here and there, but back in school, going for art competitions and stuff. But I never really drew like how people who go to art school draw. I never drew on a daily basis. I would draw like once in 6 months or something like that. So there was a huge gap and anxiety that built up even after graduating. Like, would I be able to do this? Would I be able to cope up in FCD? All that came along, and then eventually I realized that, you know what, I'm gonna just focus on this, get into graphic design. Taught myself how to do work on Photoshop and InDesign, and eventually just push myself to keep getting gigs, and then eventually getting the jobs that I did.
So, wait, I'm kind of confused about something. So, before you joined FCD, you didn't have any proper self learning or even under supervision of a mentor, like any sort of like drawing fundamentals training or
Nothing.
practice. So,
No,
you
I
went there
had none.
basically from zero to.
It is, that's the most surprising thing when I tell people that, like, I had my portfolio that I sent in to FCD, and I had to do a second test because they weren't too sure if, like, okay, you can't draw very well, but do you at least have like some kind of a design sensibility? Do you have Can you think of something? Can you think like a designer? So they gave me some more briefs, right? And then I think based on that and the interview, I got in. But there are a lot of students that do come in with like I did. Like, FZD really teaches you the fundamentals. You don't need to learn to be able to draw to get in, right? So it really does. If you go there with a full focused mind, you would get like you would be able to cover all the fundamentals within the same year in FCD.
How long did it took for the whole process?
It's a 1 year course. The foundations are more or less the first semester teaches you like I think it's 4 months. Yeah, the first 4 months is teaching all the basics of perspective and hand sketching, everything by hand. So that really doing almost 18 hours a day of that for 4 months brings your level up, quite high up after a while. But I would say my skills, because I didn't have the drawing skills, I got it to a level where I could present. It wasn't as good as the students around me, but I kept pushing those levels. Whenever I had time, like made time for myself after finishing a project, I would like try and sketch more. But that was about it. Like, like I just used the extra time that I had there to just push myself again and again. But FZD does really have like, I wouldn't say shortcuts, but they've cramped up so much in that 1 year that the pressure and learning from the people around you, you really, it's shocking how much you can achieve in that 1 year just by focusing on that and nothing else.
Wow, sounds like a really immersive, intense bootcamp. But I mean, in the
It
end,
is actually, it's
it
like,
gives result. It gives result.
it does. We used to joke around about how it's like the Navy SEAL training of artists, right? Like, because I mean, you don't hear about these kind of things otherwise. It was only the FCD. That's why I chose FCD, because I had that anxiety. Like, I wanted to learn how to do art, but every time I used to go to some school or some course or the other, it was like, oh, you need to be able to do at least this much to be able to join our course. And then it was only FCD that said that, oh, you don't need to be able to draw. We'll teach you how to draw, but it's really expensive. So I chose that route because I said, okay, I can take the time to get some experience, life experiences, and build that money just so that I can go to FCD, and then let them teach me the rest of it, which worked out pretty well, to be honest.
Yeah, I like your story. It's a
Yeah,
man with determination for their passion. That's
yeah.
admirable, sir.
Thank you.
And all right. And I was going to ask aside from my next questions. I was going to ask. Oh, I remember what I was going to say. You're actually, I think, not the first one in the podcast who said they got inspired by Feng Yu. If
Yeah,
I didn't mispronounce his name. Yeah, he apparently inspired a lot of people to get into concept art. So I mean, that's actually amazing when you
sure.
think about it.
I, I'm not sure if he was the first one. He might have not been the first one on YouTube, but he kind of made it popular for as what concept art was basically on YouTube. At least from the people I spoke to at FZD, everyone found about concept art through him online. And I think that really kind of sparked a new generation of artists, just like, oh, this is what I wanted to do all along. I don't need to go into animation, or I don't need to go into this, because I want to create, right? Like, you want to be the source of that inspiration, and which then gets passed down to the 3D artists and the animators. And yeah, I think that was for me one of the biggest things, is that I always wanted to create, but I didn't know how to do that. So once I found him, I locked on and I never looked back.
Awesome. And what is your main branch of design that you're focusing on right now? And tell us about your experience from the start of it until now. I mean, of course, earlier I mentioned that you're a concept artist, well, and
Yeah,
I assume
yeah,
that's your main
yeah.
branch. So, but give us a little bit more in depth explanation.
So I mainly am an environment concept artist. Um, what I do at Yash Raj is basically, we take briefs from the directors and writers, and we try to break down the film, right? Like, we try to break down all the design problems that we have, try to do world building, um, And we don't really stick only to environments. We try to do certain props or characters and environments and vehicles as well. But for the most part, I would say about 80 90% of my job is basically focusing on environments and how that should look. So there are three different things with this: pre-production, production, and then there's post-production of a movie, right? So for the pre-production, like when a writer or a director comes up with a script, we develop the world building so that it can be pitched to either the board of directors or like to actors and stuff like that, right? So that this is the movie that you could be featuring in and stuff like that. So then comes the production time, that during the film, uh, the work that you put in, and then the post production as well, which is very, very much lesser than what the pre production usually has, because we've been mainly focusing on pre production, world building stuff. Um, so my entire experience with it has been that, like, the pipeline goes like this, where we take the script, we break it down, we try to solve all the design issues, and then we eventually try to make a keyframe for it, where like it's high action, or try and put a lot of people into it. So this is what the film could look like. um, so it's always like a lot of design that builds up towards a keyframe, and basically we try to compile all of that for the presentation later, and we work very closely with the directors as well.
All right. And how does your design process usually go anytime you want to start working on a new project? Like, what steps, what structure do you have, pipeline do you have for, like, process of your works?
Um, uh, so my process is basically like kind of the same as like what most students go through in FCD, because that's drilled into you from day one. Is reference. You have to do referencing, and we compile a lot of references, and then we try to see what kind of direction the director would like to take things on, right? Um, so eventually, once we get a good direction or a good flow of like, okay, this is what they are thinking of doing, we start to do sketches, a lot of sketches, or thumbnails, like whichever works. Like my workflow kind of like switches depending on certain things. Sometimes I might not find the best of sketches with the references, or sometimes I might just use shape language to find the results that I want. And once I get those thumbnails in, then we present it, right? And then we get feedback on that. And once we get the feedback on that, then I start building it in 3D, in Blender. And once I get the lighting and maybe certain materials here and there, and the basic 3D mesh, I, I will take it to Photoshop, to Photo Bash, and paint on top as well. And that will basically also go through many iterations, many rounds of correcting, color correcting, and maybe sometimes even like destroying half of the image again just to get the result that the director wants. But yeah, that's mainly like how most of my process goes.
Awesome. Sounds really interesting. And by the way, I want to apologize to anyone who's listening, or if you guys hearing an extra sound, because I just turned on my AC and I kind of can't handle the heat. I'm sorry. But I'm gonna test it. Like, I'm gonna listen to the end the product of the podcast. If the sound is too much, I'll try to figure something out. But yeah, I need to know. I need to experiment to see in the end. But for now,
Yeah.
I don't want to sweat too much. I'm just gonna be honest about that. All right. So actually, I want to talk about right now. I want to talk about some of your works that you posted on your Instagram and ArtStation as well.
Sure.
Um, like, I mean, I've seen and heard a lot of stories about people like self-learning art and just in general fundamentals and everything, or people who bought, for example, Udemy courses or courses on schoolism or everything.
Yeah.
But the difference really shows for someone who went to a really intense, really like good art school for a year, and your works
Yeah.
even from 2019,
Yeah.
they fundamentally in terms of coloring and lighting look really professional, like for a beginner.
Oh,
Because
thank
at
you.
the time I assume
Yeah.
you're a beginner, if I'm not wrong, right?
Yeah. 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 I mean,
Yeah.
like, considering that I couldn't draw since 2018, right?
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Yes, no problem. And another thing I want to talk about is I see a lot of. I mean, you said that you're environment artist, but there seems to be a passion for dragons lately, and basically medieval, fantasy stuff like that. But I also see some, futuristic stuff. But mostly it's all in a like a medieval fantasy world. Like your works belong in that kind of world. So explain to us, tell us why that's the case. What made you so interested in that kind of subject and theme? I mean, of course, art is subjective, but we just want to hear your story, basically.
So the thing is, like, one of my biggest inspirations for getting to wanting to create or world building and become a concept artist was I have a huge love for fantasy books, right? Like Lord of the Rings and then Aragon and all these kind of fantasy novels that came out. That since I was a kid, I used to love reading Harry Potter as well. Um, so things like the most recent ones, the dragons, was basically because I always had this fear of like drawing dragons because they're like so majestic and large in size that just thinking about drawing a dragon was overwhelming for me. And then eventually I just decided, you know what, like I'm supposedly a professional concept artist now, and I should be able to tackle anything I put my mind to. So then I finally decided, okay, let me try the dragons out. And once I started doing them, like I really loved it. Like I was finally able to do the things that I always wanted to do as a kid, right? And these are not like projects that I can do at work. So I try to like make time for myself on the weekends and just do the things that I always loved doing and wanted to do as well. So that's why the medieval is also because most of the fantasies that I used to read were based during the medieval period, right? Like the movies I loved watching, the books I loved reading, and even the games, the RPG games. They are mostly like Dragon Age Inquisition, The Witcher, all
Elder
these kind of games.
Scrolls.
The Elder, yeah, exactly, Skyrim, right? So I loved all these kind of games, and I think that's where my visual library really is like calling out to me, like you need to do more of this because but the art station and stuff like that is like so saturated, so I would always like kind of like skim past it and like no, not today. But eventually like the love for dragons came back and I was like, okay, I need to tackle this now. It's something new, let me try and see how it works. So just to get rid of the fear as well. Yeah.
All right, awesome. And who are your favorite artists and designers that have inspired you the most?
um well, mainly when I was in what you could call it. I mean, other than Feng back in 2010 onwards, right? Like I used to follow him, and then all the names that I came through back then. I mean, I forgot most of them that I used to follow. But once I got into FCD, the biggest influence I had was like most of the Naughty Dog artists, like Eitan Zana and John Sweeney, Aaron Lemonic, and these guys, right? Even Sebastian Groman, who's there as one of the concept artists at Naughty Dog. But other than them, I used to love like going through tutorials of Jama and Vitali. Then there was also Martin Deschambault, I think, on Ubisoft. He used to work on most of the Assassin's Creed stuff. Yeah. And now one of the most recent ones are like Raf Grassetti from God of War. Like he's one of my favorite 3D artists that like he just inspires me like a lot whenever I see his work. His work is like so like high detail, high fidelity, you could say. Him and then there's Alexander Mandrajiev. I don't know how to pronounce his last name, but yeah, he's worked on like Marvel and Spider-Man and stuff like that. Yeah.
All right, and what technologies and softwares do you mostly use for your works?
For the most part, I work on Blender and Photoshop. But like for example, like the dragons that I worked on, I sculpted them in ZBrush because we were taught that in FCD how to use ZBrush. So that became part of my workflow for anything organic or any creature design and stuff like that, which I even use at my workplace. Um, but it's mainly ZBrush, Blender, Daz as well for human characters, right? Like it's free, so you don't want to spend too much. But yeah, I would say Blender has become my predominant application now, 3D application. But yeah,
All
that's about it.
right. And any advice and tips for a good portfolio and resume for artists? I mean, considering you're already working in a studio right now, film studio, and you
Yeah.
have experience in that field, any advice, any tips for
Well,
portfolio and resume for artists?
other than the typical how like stick to like one thing, and then like if you want to get into environment concept art, just like have environments on your portfolio. But my recent experience, especially at my team, right, is like what we look for sometimes a little bit of generalist, at least when it comes to the movies, right? Because we are a small team that juggle different things, right? While I mainly do environments, I also sometimes have to work on characters and costumes and stuff like that. There are others in my team who are pretty good at it, but we have to like be able to work on characters while sometimes they do environments as well, or even props and vehicles. So we kind of do look for a general list, but it's good to have like 80 to 90% of your portfolio focused on one thing, either characters or environments, and then maybe 10% of it to show that you have the skill set to tackle other areas of work. So like I don't completely subscribe to the idea that you have to show only environments. I feel everyone has like a new way of bringing ideas to the table, and sometimes you might not see that in their environments. You might see them how they communicate in their characters, right? And sometimes that can be the deal breaker, right? Like you'll be like, okay, so if we are too bogged down with a character, this environment artist will also be able to help us with that. So we try to look for those kind of ideas as well in the portfolio. So I would recommend keeping 80 to 90% of your portfolio to one field, and then maybe showing a skill set of other things like characters and stuff like that as your last 10% or something like that.
All right. And what are you working on right now that you can tell us about? What kind of project is it? I mean, of course, if there's an NDA involved, we can skip right past this question. But if that's not the
Yeah.
case,
I honestly can't say anything about
all right,
any because
gotcha.
we are juggling between 3 to 4 movies, so like they're all at different stages. But that's the like at least when one of them comes out, I'll be able to talk about it. But I can't talk about any of them right now because they're all in different stages. So and COVID basically has kept everything on the back burner. So can't even talk about like much. But I mean, yeah, like I can't talk about projects, but like I could definitely talk about how like the processes go. I mean, it's
Yeah,
basically
yeah,
the
that
same
would be
thing,
awesome
right?
if you could share with us.
Yeah, so mainly the like there are, like I was saying, they're all in different stages. There are some which are like in the beginning stages, right, where you need to do the pitch to show like, okay, this is gonna work. Like, do the company needs to make a decision whether they should be able to spend the money. Should they spend the money into a project? Can it be done? Can it be worked on? Is it believable? And will people like it, right? So we gotta like dive into it, do the world building, come out with keyframes to inspire for the pitch, and basically we've had a good success rate for that. Like every project that we've been working on, they've been very happy with. And yeah, that's about all as much as I can say, other than diving into some NDA stuff. But
All right,
yeah.
gotcha. And what area beside the area you're working on right now would you be interested to explore and learn in the future?
I am kind of getting quite a lot into books, right? Reading a lot and stuff like that. Where I'm trying to, I haven't come up with any processes yet. Like it's more like uh, I'm trying to find a way like of storytelling in like other than the typical ways that we see on Instagram and ArtStation. And there are certain processes that I've built up at work, which I hope I can try and like incorporate into my work here as well. For example, like just a small thing. I mean, it's nothing big yet, but it's just a small thing. Like I realized that I could do GIFs of my thumbnails because I would like learn from storyboard artists. So I'd just tighten them up a bit and make a small GIF out of it, out of like take make 20 frames out of that whole process, and then present that uh, to the director or the writer, and they would love the process, right? Because they can see how the action will unfold rather than just looking at one static image. So I would make a frame by frame image of GIF image of that. So I'm trying to think of how I can bring that and translate that better, like and try show it on social media maybe, or like give back of sorts, like because you learn so much from so many artists for free. So I was like, if anyone was in my position back in how I was, I would have loved to see things like that. So, yeah.
All right.
Other than that, there's, to be honest with you, like I was saying, because of my work takes so much time for me, I mainly try not to dive too much into anything else. So I keep time for my family and just like relax and go have a drink or watch a football or something like that. So it's all just downtime after work. But other than that, everything else that I do, like watching movies or games, it kind of helps your work. It's just the field that you're in. Other than that, I just try to keep it clear, just for my own mental health, so that I don't get too overburdened with stuff. You know.
All right, that sounds awesome. And well, with everything that's been said and done, to conclude all we discussed, please give us a roadmap for someone who's zero in visual arts and wants to get to the place you are in terms of skill set, like books, courses, mindset, any type of particular advice and tips you have, like basically for someone who is here and wants
Mhm.
to get to here, and
Yeah.
what major steps should they take?
Yeah. So the things that helped me the most was always like having a plan for something. Like, say for example, okay, I can get a good enough result with my work, and I want to take it up, right? Like I would focus on just lighting, color and lighting. I would take up books on that, like read books on that and try and implement what I learned from these books into uh, the next projects that I work on, and just focus on it, because you never see the results at an early stage. It always takes some time, and then you'll always have a dip, and then again you'll go on another high. But I think that you have to go through the process, and you have to keep pushing every time you're working something new. Don't get lazy with it. Like try to make your practice perfect. Like basically, perfect practice makes perfect, right? So if you keep doing that, I think basically it will take you up there, and you might not see it now, you might see it a few months later, but always have a plan and take things one bite size at a time. Either it's colors and lighting, or it's just thumbnailing or compositions. And like Framed Ink, for example, is an amazing book for compositions. I think it's one of the best books I've at least come across.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that, please? The book?
Framed Ink, Framed Ink.
Frame Inc.
Yes, yes.
All right.
So that is a fantastic book on compositions. Like it has such a simplistic way of looking at compositions and how to go about it, and that helped me a lot. So I would basically use Eitan Zana's tutorials on his thumbnailing process, and I would apply what I learned from the book and just focus on my thumbnails for like for a few months. I would just do that, and I think once you level up in each category, it all combines eventually. A few months down the line, that you start seeing results. So stick to one thing in particular. Don't try to take everything at once. Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks so much for coming by, and thank you to everyone who tuned in and listened. Sorry if the setup was a little bit scuffed today. Um, I'm a bit rusty with podcasts. As I said, I had a break from podcasting, and hopefully the quality will just improve from now on. And well, thank you so much for coming by. Where can people contact you if they had any question? Is your Instagram okay?
My Instagram is fine. Clive.Almeida. And
Mm-hmm.
then I have my account on ArtStation as well.
All right.
So they could reach me up on Instagram or ArtStation if they
I
having a
mean,
question.
who reaches an art station? Let's be real. Rarely people do.
I actually have a lot of people that have reached out. I've
Really?
had people from the US. Yeah, I've had a lot of people on
Awesome.
ArtStation reach out.
Wow, I never knew that.
I might have had at least 20 people on ArtStation the last year reach out on
Damn,
ArtStation. To be
that's
honest with you, I've
amazing.
had more people on ArtStation than on Instagram reach out to me.
Really?
Yeah, I'm not kidding.
Ah,
I've
that's
even had like a
great.
3D artist who wanted, like many 3D artists who wanted to like take my concepts and build 3D out of it. So a lot of them
Wow.
would contact me on ArtStation. Yeah.
All right, so here's the thing. We wrapped everything up, but starting from this episode, I want to add another segment that I think which make the whole journey and the story of the podcast much more richer and better in general. In this section, I want to ask every guest. I'm going to ask you right now that Clive Almeida, right now, you've been on this episode 76, and you have a chance to say one personal note or word to anyone who's listening. Imagine this is your podium and you can say anything you want, any message
Yeah.
about anything. Like, imagine, like, yeah, you get the point to the
Yeah.
world. Now is your chance.
I guess it's the one key takeaway that I find at least different from my story compared to the others is that even if you don't know how to draw or something like, it's never too late to start. You can always start anytime, whether you're 30, 40, 50, doesn't matter, I guess. I mean, if you have a little bit of security with you in terms of surviving for the next 1 year or so without working, and you want to make the change to concept art, I think it's always the best thing to do is just go for your dreams, work hard towards it. Don't look back once you get into it, right? Like it it gets overwhelming, especially nowadays with social media. It's like you want to do the next big thing, or you want to be an engineer or whatever it is, just because peer pressure, right? But do the thing that you love the most. Like even if you love engineering, do it, because it's if you don't love it, you're not going to have a um, good time with it mentally, especially because I mean when pressure come when you get the pressure, right, when the pressure starts setting in at work, when life throws you curveballs, right, like emergencies and stuff like that, it's just you would prefer to love what you do, and I think you'd be the best at it if you love it, basically.
All right. Thanks again so much for coming by, and
Thank you
see
for having
you
me.
see you everyone in the next episode. Have a good day, everyone. Bye.